May I take it that the Assembly wishes to adopt the draft resolution A/76/L2? It is so decided.
The event also adopted a political declaration that seeks to galvanize and re-energize efforts towards a world free of racial discrimination and injustice, with a view here that 2 decades post-Durban, structural racism and systemic injustice still deny people their fundamental human rights.
Millions of descendants of Africans who were sold into slavery remain trapped in lives of underdevelopment, disadvantage, discrimination, and poverty. South Africa calls on the United Nations to put the issue of reparations for victims of the slave trade on its agenda. We support the adoption of special measures, including affirmative action and targeted financial assistance as restitution to communities whose ancestors were sold into slavery.
Ramaphosa indicated that just as the world stands united to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, so too it should recommit itself to the implementation of Durban's outcomes.
We must pursue this objective with energy and goodwill. Ending racism is a fight in which each of us has a stake. Let us allow humanism to be our guide and solidarity. And solidarity must also be our strongest force. We are called upon by history to redouble our efforts to build a world that is free of racism, to right the wrongs of the past, and to restore the human dignity of all.
The UN chief echoed his earlier view that racism, from glaring infringements to creeping transgressions, was a clear example of how human rights more generally were under assault.
Racism is often the cruel catalyst. The linkages between racism and gender inequality are unmistakable, and we see some of the worst impacts in the overlaps and intersections of discrimination suffered by women from radicalized communities and minority groups. We are witnessing a troubling rise in anti-Semitism, a harbinger throughout history of discrimination against others. We must condemn without reservation or hesitation the racism and discrimination of growing anti-Muslim bigotry, the mistreatment of minority Christians and other forms of intolerance around the world.
The General Assembly in 2015 proclaimed the International Decade for People of African Descent to promote concrete measures to stop discrimination and promote their full inclusion.
Reparation should be broad-based and need to include measures aimed at restitution, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. This may include formal acknowledgement and apologies, memorialization, and institutional and educational reforms. For reparations to be effective, all these elements are needed. We should be clear, though, that these efforts must go beyond symbolism and that they do require political, human, and financial capital.
Various ministerial roundtables will continue throughout the day. The aim of those discussions to further take stock of progress since Durban, to examine contemporary and emerging challenges in the fight against racism and its related intolerances, with a message here that stronger efforts must be employed by all stakeholders to implement the goals laid out in Durban 20 years ago. Sherwin Bryceby's SABC News, New York.